Clara Bennett stared at the text message that would change everything. Sorry, space issues. You're uninvited from the wedding. Thanks for all your help, though. 6 months of her life. Hundreds of hours. Her professional reputation on the line. All dismissed with a casual text from her own sister. Clara's hands trembled as she sat in her small apartment, surrounded by wedding planning binders that suddenly felt like monuments to her own foolishness. What her sister Megan didn't know was that every single contract for that dream wedding was signed not by the bride, but by Clara Events LLC. And what none of them could possibly imagine was that in exactly 72 hours, a mysterious billionaire would walk into Clara's life and transform her humiliation into the most spectacular revenge her family had ever witnessed. Clara had always been the invisible sister. At 28, she had built a successful event planning business from nothing, working 18-hour days and weekends to establish herself in the competitive luxury market. But in her family's eyes, she would always be the plain, dependable one who made things happen behind the scenes, while her older sister Megan basked in admiration as the beautiful, charming daughter who could do no wrong. The pattern had been established in childhood. When Megan wanted something, the family moved mountains to make it happen. When Clara needed something, she learned to handle it herself. Megan got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the family's attention and pride. Clara got the expectation that she would always be there to help, to support, to make everyone else's dreams come true. So when Megan announced her engagement to David Thornton, heir to a hotel fortune, Clara's immediate response was exactly what her family expected. She offered her professional services as a wedding gift, worth at least $50,000. Not because she was asked, but because that's what Clara did. She gave until it hurt, hoping that maybe this time, her sacrifice would earn her the love and recognition she craved. For 6 months, Clara poured her heart and soul into creating Megan's perfect day. She negotiated with the most exclusive vendors in the city, secured the impossible venue, designed elaborate floral arrangements, and coordinated every detail of what would be featured in 3 different bridal magazines. Clara worked nights and weekends, turning down paying clients to focus on her sister's wedding. She found herself genuinely excited, imagining the moment when Megan would realize how much thought and care had gone into every element. The venue Clara had secured was the Grand Conservatory, a glass cathedral overlooking the city that booked solid for 2 years in advance. She had called in every favor, leveraged every relationship, and negotiated tirelessly to make it happen. The floral designer was Antonio Mendez, whose waiting list was 6 months long and whose arrangements started at $10,000. The caterer was Thomas Chun, a James Beard winner who typically only worked with Fortune 500 companies and European royalty. Clara's apartment had become mission control for Operation Perfect Wedding. Her dining table was covered with fabric swatches, her walls lined with mood boards, her kitchen counter stacked with vendor contracts. She had tasting menus from 7 different caterers, samples from 4 different cake artists, and a color-coded timeline that accounted for every minute of the wedding day. The work consumed her life, but Clara found joy in it. She loved seeing her vision come together, loved the moment when a client's face lit up as they saw their dreams becoming reality. This was her gift, her art, her way of creating magic in the world. And for her own sister's wedding, she was determined to create something truly extraordinary. But as the months progressed, subtle signs began to suggest that Clara's contribution wasn't being valued the way she had hoped. Megan began taking credit for Clara's ideas when talking to friends. She would casually mention, "I found this amazing venue," or "I had this brilliant idea for the centerpieces," never acknowledging that Clara had spent weeks researching and planning every detail. When Clara tried to discuss the wedding plans with Megan, her sister would wave her off. "You're the professional, just handle it," she would say dismissively. "I trust you to make it perfect." It should have felt like a compliment, but instead it felt like another way of being kept at arm's length, another reminder that her value lay in what she could do, not who she was. The family dynamic became even more apparent during the engagement party, which Clara had also planned and executed flawlessly. As guests complimented the beautiful decorations and seamless organization, Megan gracefully accepted praise without once mentioning Clara's role. When someone asked about the wedding plans, Megan spoke about her vision and her choices, while Clara stood nearby, invisible as always. Their mother, Patricia Bennett, reinforced the family hierarchy at every opportunity. Meghan has such exquisite taste. She would gush to anyone who would listen. She always knows exactly what she wants. Meanwhile, Clara's expertise was taken for granted, expected rather than appreciated. When Clara mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the workload, her mother's response was predictably dismissive. "You're so good at this kind of thing, dear. It's what you do." The breaking point should have come weeks earlier, but Clara was too invested, too hopeful, too accustomed to the family dynamic to recognize the warning signs. She continued to work tirelessly, believing that the wedding day would vindicate everything. Surely when Meghan saw what Clara had created, when the family witnessed the magic she had woven from nothing, they would finally see her value as more than just the dependable one who handled logistics. Then came the text message that shattered everything. Clara read it 3 times before the words fully registered. "Space issues. Uninvited. Thanks for all your help, though." The casual cruelty was breathtaking. Not a phone call, not a conversation, not even an explanation. Just a dismissive text message as if Clara were a vendor who could be casually canceled, not a sister who had devoted half a year of her life to making Meghan's dreams come true. Clara's first instinct was to call, to demand an explanation, to fight for her place at the celebration she had created. But when she dialed Meghan's number, the call went straight to voicemail. She tried again an hour later, then again that evening. Each time, voicemail. Desperate for answers, Clara called her mother. Patricia's response was even more devastating than Meghan's original text. "Oh, honey, don't take it personally," she said in that condescending tone Clara knew so well. "You know how these things are. David's family has so many obligations, and the guest list just got out of hand. Meghan feels terrible about it, but she had to make some difficult choices." "But Mom, I planned the entire wedding," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I've worked on nothing else for 6 months. I turned down paying clients. I used all my professional connections. And we're so grateful, sweetheart. Really, we are. But you have to understand, this is Meghan's day. She can't be worried about hurt feelings when she has so much pressure from David's family. You're being very selfish to make this difficult for her." The conversation ended with Clara staring at her phone in shock. Selfish. She was being selfish for expecting to attend the wedding she had planned, for wanting to be included in the celebration she had made possible. The gaslight was so bright it was blinding. But the family's cruelty wasn't finished. 2 days later, Clara's father called with a request that defied belief. "We're all contributing to a group wedding gift for Meghan and David," he announced. "Something really special. We need $2,000 from you." Clara was speechless. They wanted her to contribute $2,000 to a wedding gift for the sister who had uninvited her from the wedding she had planned for free. The audacity was staggering, but it was also revealing. In their minds, Clara existed solely to serve the family's needs. Her feelings, her dignity, her professional contribution, none of it mattered. Only her utility had value. "I'm not attending the wedding, Dad," Clara said quietly. "I don't think it's appropriate for me to contribute to a gift." "Now don't be difficult, Clara," he replied in the same condescending tone she had heard from her mother. "This is bigger than whatever little disagreement you and Meghan are having. Family comes first. Family comes first." The irony was suffocating. Family had come first for Clara her entire life. She had sacrificed her time, her energy, her own needs for this family that saw her as nothing more than a convenient source of labor. And now they expected her to fund their gift while excluding her from the celebration. The next blow came through social media, that modern amphitheater where humiliation plays out in public. Clara's cousin Jessica posted a photo from Meghan's bridal shower with the caption, "A-Team Girls Night. Hashtag Bride Squad, hashtag Sister Love, hashtag Wedding Vibes." The image showed 8 women raising champagne glasses at an upscale restaurant, all glowing with joy and excitement. Meghan was in the center, radiant in a white dress Clara had helped her choose, surrounded by cousins and friends Clara knew well. The venue was Bellezza, an exclusive Italian restaurant Clara had recommended during one of their planning sessions. She recognized the private dining room she had suggested, the same room where she had imagined herself celebrating with her sister just weeks before. Instead, she was looking at it through a phone screen, completely erased from the narrative of her own sister's wedding festivities. Clara studied the photo with the masochistic attention to detail that digital humiliation demands. Every face was familiar. Every smile was bright. Every glass was raised in celebration of a wedding Clara had made possible but was forbidden to attend. The comments below were even worse, filled with heart emojis and congratulations and insider jokes about wedding preparations Clara had managed but couldn't share in. But it was Jessica's follow-up post that truly broke something inside Clara. A series of photos from the shower showed the women playing games, opening gifts, and laughing together. The final image was a group shot with the caption, "Megan's Dream Team, making her wedding dreams come true." Love these ladies. Dream Team, making her wedding dreams come true. The women in that photo had contributed nothing to the wedding beyond their presence and their enthusiasm. Clara was the one who had negotiated with vendors, managed timelines, solved problems, and created the very dream they were celebrating. But she was invisible, erased, replaced by women whose only qualification was being wanted at the celebration. The social media documentation of her exclusion continued throughout the evening. Stories and posts and tagged photos of a celebration Clara should have been central to but was completely absent from. She watched her own professional work being celebrated by people who had no idea how much effort had gone into creating the perfect day they were anticipating. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. Clara finally turned off her phone and sat in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the physical evidence of her devotion to a family that saw her as disposable. Wedding planning binders lined her coffee table. Vendor contracts were stacked on her desk. Fabric samples were pinned to her bulletin board. 6 months of her life documented in meticulous detail, and none of it mattered to the people it was meant to serve. The realization that followed was both liberating and terrifying. She had been living her entire life for people who would never love her the way she loved them. She had been chasing approval from people who saw her value only in terms of what she could provide. She had been participating in her own devaluation, hoping that if she gave enough, sacrificed enough, worked hard enough, they would finally see her worth. But they never would, because in their minds, her worth was entirely utilitarian. She was the sister who handled logistics, who managed problems, who made things happen behind the scenes so that others could enjoy the spotlight. The moment she stopped being useful, she became expendable. The anger that followed was clean and clarifying. For the first time in her life, Clara allowed herself to feel genuinely furious at her family's treatment. She had spent 28 years making excuses for their behavior, rationalizing their selfishness, accepting crumbs of affection in exchange for unlimited service. But sitting alone in her apartment on a Saturday night, watching other people celebrate the wedding she had created, Clara finally understood that she deserved better. The next morning brought the final insult. Megan called, not to apologize or explain, but to ask for help. The band had canceled 10 days before the wedding, and she was in a panic. "Clara, thank God you answered," Megan said, her voice tight with stress. "The band just canceled. Food poisoning or something. Can you find us a replacement? You know all the good musicians in the city. Please, I'm desperate." The audacity was breathtaking. After uninviting Clara from the wedding, after 6 months of taking her work for granted, after allowing their family to treat her like a disposable vendor, Megan still expected Clara to solve her problems. She wanted Clara's expertise, her connections, her professional reputation, but she didn't want Clara herself. "I can't help you, Megan," Clara said quietly. "What do you mean you can't help me? Of course you can help me. You're the event planner. This is what you do." "I'm not your event planner anymore. You uninvited me from the wedding, remember? That's completely different." Megan's voice rose to a sharp whine. "That was about space limitations. This is about saving my wedding. You can't just abandon me now." The word choice was perfect in its irony. Clara couldn't abandon Megan, but Megan could certainly abandon Clara. The family's expectations were as predictable as they were infuriating. Clara existed to serve their needs regardless of how they treated her. "Find another planner," Clara said. "I'm sure you can handle it. You have such exquisite taste." She hung up before Megan could respond, her heart pounding with the unfamiliar sensation of standing up for herself. Within minutes, her phone was buzzing with calls from her mother, her father, and several relatives, all demanding that she fix Megan's crisis. Clara turned off her phone and sat in the blessed silence of her apartment, finally free from their emotional manipulation. But the real revelation was still to come. As Clara reviewed the vendor contracts she had signed over the past 6 months, a detail she had forgotten began to surface. Every contract, every agreement, Every legal document was signed not by the bride and groom, but by Clara Events LLC. In her professional thoroughness, she had followed standard industry practices, signing as the event coordinator on behalf of her clients. What this meant was staggering. Legally, Megan wasn't the client. Clara's company was the contracting party with every vendor. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, the musicians, all of them had contracts with Clara's business, not with the bride and groom. Megan had no legal relationship with any of the wedding vendors. Clara pulled out the contract with the Grand Conservatory and read the fine print she knew by heart. Final payment was due 7 days before the event. If payment wasn't received, the venue reserved the right to cancel without penalty. The same clause appeared in every vendor contract she had signed. It was standard industry practice, designed to protect vendors from non-payment. The irony was delicious. In their rush to exploit Clara's generosity, the family had overlooked a crucial detail. Clara wasn't just the family member who had planned the wedding for free. She was the legal representative, the contracting party, the person with the power to cancel every service. Clara spent the next hour reading through contracts, taking notes, and calculating exactly what it would mean if she exercised her legal rights. The venue deposit alone was $25,000. The catering contract was $40,000. The floral arrangements were $15,000. The photographer was $8,000. In total, Megan and David were expecting services worth over $120,000, all contracted through Clara's company. And according to the contracts, final payment was due in exactly 7 days. Clara had never felt power like this before. For her entire life, she had been at the mercy of her family's whims and expectations. But suddenly, she held all the cards. She was no longer the invisible sister begging for scraps of affection. She was a business owner with legal rights and professional obligations. The thought of what she could do was intoxicating, but Clara was too smart and too professional to act impulsively. Instead, she called her friend Sarah Chun, a lawyer who specialized in contract law. "I need to ask you a hypothetical question about vendor contracts," Clara began. Sarah listened as Clara explained the situation, asking occasional clarifying questions about specific contract terms. When Clara finished, there was a long pause. "Clara," Sarah said slowly, "this isn't a gray area. Those contracts are legally binding, and you have every right to cancel services if final payments aren't received. You're not being vindictive. You're following standard business practices. But what about the moral implications? I mean, it's my sister's wedding." "The moral implications?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "What about the moral implications of uninviting you from a wedding you planned for free? What about the moral implications of expecting you to contribute to a gift for an event you're excluded from? Clara, your family has been treating you like a vendor they can abuse without consequences. Maybe it's time they learned that vendors have rights." The validation was exactly what Clara needed. She wasn't being petty or vindictive. She was being professional. She was setting boundaries. She was finally choosing to value herself the way her family never had. That night, Clara drafted the cancellation emails. Her language was professional, courteous, and legally precise. She explained that due to non-payment of final invoices, Clara Events LLC was exercising its contractual right to cancel services. She provided the contract clauses that supported her decision and offered the vendors her regrets that the situation had reached this point. She scheduled the emails to send automatically in 7 days, exactly when final payments were due. This gave the family 1 week to make things right, to acknowledge her worth, to include her in the celebration she had created. Clara doubted they would, but she gave them the chance anyway. Meanwhile, Clara made a decision that would change everything. She booked a flight to Hawaii for the weekend of Megan's wedding. Not because she was running away, but because she was finally running towards something: her own happiness, her own dignity, her own life. The Hawaii trip was more than just an escape. It was a declaration of independence. While her family scrambled through chaos of their own making, Clara would be sitting on a beach with a Mai Tai, finally free from their emotional manipulation. The geographic distance would mirror the emotional boundaries she was establishing. On the Tuesday before the wedding, Clara was at her office putting the finishing touches on a proposal for a corporate event when her assistant buzzed her. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's about the Bennett wedding." Clara's heart sank. She assumed it was someone from Megan's side, probably David's father, coming to intimidate her into reversing the cancellations. The Thornton family had money and influence, and Clara braced herself for threats or attempts at manipulation. But when her assistant showed the visitor into her office, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The man standing in her doorway was tall, impeccably dressed, and devastatingly handsome in a way that belonged on magazine covers. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit was clearly custom-made, and his presence filled the room with an energy Clara couldn't identify. "Miss Bennett." His voice was smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an accent Clara couldn't place. "My name is Alexander Rains. I believe you're planning an event that one of my companies is catering." Clara recognized the name immediately. Alexander Rains was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, with holdings in technology, real estate, and hospitality. His face had graced the covers of Fortune and Forbes, and his romantic life was constant tabloid fodder. What was he doing in her small office? "Mr. Rains," Clara managed, standing up on unsteady legs. What can I do for you?" Alexander smiled, and the expression transformed his already handsome face into something that made Clara's heart skip. "I understand there's been some confusion about the Bennett Thornton wedding. Thomas Chun is a friend of mine, and he mentioned that services are being canceled due to non-payment. I wanted to discuss the situation directly." Clara's mind raced. Thomas Chun, the celebrity chef, was friends with Alexander Rains. Of course he was. Rich people always knew each other. "I'm afraid it's not a matter of confusion," Clara said, trying to maintain her professional composure. "The contracts are very clear about payment schedules, and my company has to follow its standard policies." Alexander studied her with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see far too much. "May I sit down? I'd like to hear your perspective on what happened." For the next hour, Clara found herself telling the story she had never shared with anyone outside her immediate circle. Alexander listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively darker as Clara described her family's treatment. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You planned an entire wedding for free, and they uninvited you via text message," he said finally. "That's the simplified version, yes. And now they expect you to absorb the financial liability for services you contracted on their behalf. I suppose that's how they see it." Alexander shook his head slowly. "Ms. Bennett, I've been in business for 15 years, and I've seen every kind of contractual dispute imaginable. But I've never seen anything quite this brazen. Your family is essentially committing theft of services on a massive scale." The word theft hit Clara like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the emotional betrayal that she hadn't fully grasped the financial implications. Her family expected her to eat over $100,000 in contracted services while excluding her from the event those services would create. "The question," Alexander continued, "is what you plan to do about it. I've already done it. The cancellation notices go out tomorrow morning." "And then what?" Clara was confused. "Then what? What? What's your next move? Where do you go from here?" I'm flying to Hawaii for the weekend. I need some distance from all of this." Alexander's smile returned, but this time it held a hint of mischief. "Hawaii. Excellent choice. Which island?" "Maui, the Grand Wailea Resort." Beautiful property. I know it well." Alexander paused, as if making a decision. "Ms. Bennett, I have a proposition for you. I'm flying to my house in Maui this weekend for a business retreat. It's a small gathering of entrepreneurs and investors, very informal. Would you consider joining us? I think you might find the change of scenery beneficial." Clara stared at him in disbelief. Was Alexander Rains, billionaire businessman, asking her to spend the weekend at his house in Hawaii? It seemed impossible, like something out of a romantic movie. "I couldn't possibly impose," she began. "You wouldn't be imposing. I'm genuinely interested in your event planning business, and I think you could benefit from meeting some of my colleagues. Consider it a professional opportunity." Professional opportunity. The words gave Clara an excuse to say yes without feeling like she was accepting charity or pity. And deep down, she was intrigued by this mysterious billionaire who had appeared in her office like a knight in an expensive suit. "All right," she heard herself say. "I accept." Alexander's smile was brilliant. "Excellent. My assistant will send you the details. And Miss Bennett, don't worry about your family. They'll understand your worth soon enough." After Alexander left, Clara sat in her office in a daze. In the span of 1 hour, her life had taken a turn she never could have anticipated. Tomorrow morning, her family would discover that their perfect wedding had evaporated due to their own cruelty. And this weekend, instead of sitting alone on a beach nursing her wounds, she would be at a billionaire's house in Maui. The cancellation emails went out at exactly 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, 7 days before the wedding as specified in every contract. Clara was in her office when her phone started ringing. First Megan, then her mother, then David, then David's father. She let them all go to voicemail and listened to the messages later. The progression was predictable. Confusion, then panic, then rage, then desperate bargaining. Megan's first message was bewildered. "Clara, what's going on? The venue just called and said our wedding is canceled. Call me back immediately." By her third message, she was screaming, "You psychotic bitch. How could you destroy my wedding? I'll never forgive you for this." Her mother's messages followed the same trajectory, from motherly disappointment to raw fury. "Clara Elizabeth Bennett, you call me back this instant. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this stops now." The final message was pure venom. "You've always been jealous of your sister, but I never thought you'd sink this low. Don't bother coming to Christmas. Don't bother coming to Christmas." The threat was meant to devastate Clara, but instead it felt like liberation. No more pretending to enjoy family gatherings where she was treated like a servant. No more walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting people who had never shown her the same consideration. David's father, Jonathan Thornton, left only one message, but it was chilling in its controlled anger. "Ms. Bennett, this is Jonathan Thornton. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the wedding arrangements. I'd like to resolve this matter quickly and quietly. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Clara didn't call him back. She didn't call any of them back. For the first time in her life, she let their emotional manipulation bounce off her without response. She was done explaining herself, done justifying her decisions, done accepting abuse in the name of family harmony. Thursday morning brought a new development. Clara arrived at her office to find Jonathan Thornton waiting in the lobby. He was a tall, imposing man in his 60s, clearly used to intimidating people into submission. His expensive suit and cold eyes screamed money and power. "Ms. Bennett," he said without preamble, "we need to talk." Clara maintained her professional composure as she led him to her office. "What can I do for you, Mr. Thornton? You can stop this nonsense and honor your commitments. My son's wedding is in 3 days, and you're going to reinstate those contracts." "I'm afraid that's not possible. The contracts were canceled due to non-payment, which is standard business practice." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "Let's cut the crap, sweetheart. This isn't about business practices. This is about you having a tantrum because you didn't get invited to the party. Well, congratulations. You've made your point. Now fix it." The condescension in his voice was staggering, but Clara remained calm. "Mr. Thornton, the contracts are legal documents with specific terms. Final payment was due 7 days before the event. That payment was never made, so the contracts are void. I don't give a damn about your contracts. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I own half the commercial real estate in this city. I can make sure you never plan another event in this town." There it was, the threat Clara had been expecting. But instead of cowering, she felt a strange sense of peace. "Mr. Thornton, are you threatening my business because I followed standard industry practices? I'm telling you how things work. You can play ball, or you can find yourself ruined. Your choice." Clara looked at this powerful man across her desk, radiating menace and entitlement, and she realized something profound. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of his money or his threats or his connections. For the first time in her life, she was standing on solid ground. "Mr. Thornton, I think this conversation is over. If you have any further communications from my company, please direct them through your attorneys." Jonathan's face flushed red with anger. "You'll regret this decision, little girl. I promise you that." "Maybe," Clara said calmly, "but I'll regret it with my dignity intact." After Jonathan left, Clara's hands were shaking with adrenaline. She had just told off one of the most powerful men in the city and lived to tell about it. More importantly, she had stood up for herself and her business without backing down or apologizing. The rest of Thursday and Friday passed in a blur of angry phone calls Clara ignored, threatening text messages she deleted, and a desperate last-minute attempt by Megan to show up at Clara's office with tears and apologies that felt completely hollow. Clara listened to her sister's sob story about how the wedding was ruined and David was furious and his family blamed her for the disaster. Just tell me what you want, Megan pleaded. Money? A public apology? I'll do anything. Please don't destroy my wedding. I want you to leave my office, Clara said quietly. And I want you to stop pretending that 6 months of my work was worthless enough to dismiss with a text message. I was wrong, okay? I was wrong to uninvite you. But please, Clara, don't make me pay for one mistake for the rest of my life. One mistake. Even now, even in her desperation, Megan couldn't acknowledge the pattern of disrespect and exploitation that had defined their entire relationship. She saw Clara's reaction as disproportionate rather than recognizing it as the inevitable result of a lifetime of taking her sister for granted. This isn't about one mistake, Clara said. This is about 28 years of treating me like I exist solely to serve your needs. This is about a family that sees my value only in terms of what I can provide. This is about learning that actions have consequences. Megan left in tears, but Clara felt no satisfaction in her sister's pain. This wasn't about revenge or getting even. It was about finally choosing to value herself the way her family never had. Friday evening, Clara packed for Hawaii with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Alexander Rains had sent his private jet to pick her up, which felt like something out of a fairy tale. As the plane lifted off from the airport, Clara looked down at the city where her family was presumably scrambling to salvage a wedding they had created through their own selfishness, and she felt nothing but peace. The flight to Maui was surreal in its luxury. Clara had never been on a private jet before, and the experience of being treated like royalty was intoxicating. The flight attendant offered her champagne, gourmet food, and anything else she might need. For the first time in months, Clara relaxed completely. When the plane landed in Maui, Alexander was waiting on the tarmac in a black Range Rover. He looked even more handsome in casual clothes, and his smile, when he saw Clara, made her heart skip. "Welcome to paradise," he said, helping her into the car. "How was the flight?" "Incredible. Thank you for this. I still can't quite believe it's real." "Believe it. You deserve to be treated well, Clara. I hope this weekend helps you remember that." The drive to Alexander's house took 30 minutes through some of the most beautiful scenery Clara had ever seen. When they turned through a private gate and wound up a hillside road, Clara gasped at her first view of the estate. The house was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was the kind of place she had only seen in architectural magazines. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I'm glad you like it. Come on, I'll show you to your room." The weekend that followed exceeded every fantasy Clara had ever had about how she deserved to be treated. Alexander's house was filled with interesting, successful people who treated Clara with respect and genuine interest in her business. She found herself in conversations about entrepreneurship, creativity, and the challenges of building something from nothing. But it was Alexander himself who truly captivated her. He was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone worth billions. He asked thoughtful questions about her work, listened to her stories about difficult clients, and shared his own experiences building his business empire. More importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in Clara as a person, not just as a professional service provider. Saturday evening, they walked along the beach as the sun set over the ocean. Clara had never experienced anything so romantic or beautiful. The waves lapped at their feet, the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, and Alexander's presence beside her felt like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. "Can I ask you something?" Alexander said as they sat on a piece of driftwood, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Of course. What made you finally stand up to your family? After 28 years of accepting their treatment, what changed?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I think I finally understood that I was participating in my own devaluation. I was so desperate for their love and approval that I accepted crumbs and called it a feast. The wedding was just the final straw that broke through my denial. And now I know my worth. And I know I'd rather be alone than be with people who don't see it." Alexander turned to face her, his gray eyes serious in the moonlight. "You're not alone, Clara. Not anymore." The kiss that followed was soft and sweet and perfect, like the ending of every romantic movie Clara had ever loved. But this wasn't a movie. This was her real life, and for the first time ever, her real life was better than any fantasy she could have imagined. Sunday morning, Clara woke up in the most beautiful guest room she had ever seen. with French doors opening onto a private terrace overlooking the ocean. She checked her phone and found dozens of missed calls and text messages from her family, chronicling the complete disaster of Meghan's wedding day. Apparently, they had tried to salvage the event by booking a different venue at the last minute, but nothing was available on such short notice except a community center that usually hosted children's birthday parties. The replacement catering was pizza from a chain restaurant. The flowers were grocery store bouquets. The photographer was David's cousin with an iPhone. The wedding that was supposed to be featured in 3 magazines had become a laughingstock that everyone would want to forget. And according to the increasingly frantic messages from her mother, it was all Clara's fault. Clara deleted the messages without reading them all and joined Alexander on his terrace for breakfast. The view was spectacular, the food was delicious, and the company was perfect. She had never felt so content in her entire life. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked, nodding toward her phone. "None," Clara said firmly. "For the first time in my life, I chose myself over their expectations. It feels incredible." "Good. Because I have something to tell you." Clara looked up from her coffee, curious about the serious tone in Alexander's voice. "I didn't come to your office by coincidence last week," he said. "Thomas Chin told me about the situation, yes, but I was already aware of your work. I've been following your company for months, impressed by your reputation and your results. I was actually planning to contact you about planning some events for my companies." Clara's heart skipped. "Really? Really? But when Thomas told me what your family had done to you, I realized this was about more than business. I wanted to meet the woman who had built something extraordinary while being treated so poorly by the people who should have supported her most." "And what did you think when you met me?" Alexander's smile was tender. "I thought you were the most impressive person I'd encountered in years. Beautiful, talented, professional, and strong enough to stand up for yourself when it mattered. I knew immediately that I wanted you in my life." The conversation was interrupted by Clara's phone buzzing with yet another call from her family. This time it was her father, probably calling to deliver ultimatums and threats. Clara looked at the phone, looked at Alexander, and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She answered the call and put it on speaker. "Clara Elizabeth Bennett, where the hell are you?" Her father's voice boomed across the terrace. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Your sister's wedding was ruined. Completely ruined. The Thornton family is furious. We're all humiliated. And it's all your fault." "Actually, Dad, it's all your fault," Clara said calmly. "You treated me like garbage, so I stopped allowing myself to be treated like garbage. The consequences are entirely on you. Don't you dare take that tone with me, young lady. You get home right now and fix this mess." "I'm not coming home, Dad. I'm in Hawaii with my boyfriend, and I'm having the time of my life." Alexander raised an eyebrow at the word boyfriend, but his smile suggested he didn't object to the designation. "Your boyfriend?" Her father's voice was skeptical and angry. "What boyfriend? You don't have a boyfriend." "I do now. Alexander, would you like to say hello to my family?" Alexander leaned toward the phone with a wicked grin. "Mr. Bennett, this is Alexander Rains. I want to thank you for raising such an extraordinary daughter, even if you don't seem to appreciate her properly." There was dead silence on the other end of the phone. Clara could practically hear her father's brain processing the name Alexander Rains and all its implications. "Alexander Rains?" Her father finally managed. As in the billionaire, yes. "Clara is a remarkable woman, and I'm very fortunate that she agreed to spend this weekend with me. We're having a wonderful time." More silence. Then, in a completely different tone, her father said, "Clara, sweetheart, maybe we should talk about this situation. I'm sure we can work something out." The sudden shift from anger to manipulation was so transparent, it was almost comical. But Clara wasn't laughing. "There's nothing to work out, Dad. I'm done being the family doormat. I'm done sacrificing my dignity for your approval. And I'm done pretending that blood relation excuses abuse. Now, Clara, let's not be dramatic. We're family. Families have disagreements, but they work through them." "Families support each other," Clara replied. "Families celebrate each other's successes. Families don't exploit each other's generosity and then discard them when they're no longer useful. What we have isn't family. It's a toxic hierarchy where I exist solely to serve everyone else's needs." "But Clara," her mother's voice joined the call, "we love you. We've always loved you." "No, you don't. You love what I do for you. There's a difference. Alexander reached over and took Clara's hand, squeezing gently in support. The gesture gave her strength to continue. I'm hanging up now, Clara said. Don't call me again unless you're ready to acknowledge how you've treated me and make genuine changes. And don't expect me to fix any more of your problems. I'm officially retired from being the family's unpaid problem solver. Clara ended the call and turned off her phone. The silence that followed was peaceful rather than awkward. Boyfriend, huh? Alexander said with amusement. I hope you don't mind the presumption. I was improvising. I don't mind at all. In fact, I was hoping we could make it official. Clara's heart soared. Are you asking me to be your girlfriend? I'm asking you to be whatever you want to be in my life. Girlfriend, business partner, co-conspirator, fellow adventurer. I just know that I don't want this weekend to end. It doesn't have to end, Clara said softly. The kiss they shared on that perfect morning sealed a future Clara had never dared to imagine. She had gone from being the invisible, exploited sister to being courted by one of the most eligible bachelors in the world. More importantly, she had learned to value herself and demand the treatment she deserved. The months that followed were like a fairy tale, but better because they were real. Alexander was everything Clara had never dared to dream of in a partner. Generous, thoughtful, supportive, and genuinely interested in her success. He invested in her business, introduced her to influential clients, and celebrated her achievements with enthusiasm. Their relationship developed naturally from that magical weekend in Maui. Alexander courted Clara properly, with romantic dinners, thoughtful gifts, and genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. But more than the luxury and romance, Clara treasured the respect he showed her. He valued her opinions, supported her decisions, and never tried to minimize her accomplishments or take credit for her success. Clara's business flourished with Alexander's support and connections. She found herself planning events for Fortune 500 companies, celebrity weddings, and exclusive social gatherings. Her reputation grew beyond her wildest expectations, and she was featured in the same magazines that were supposed to showcase Meghan's wedding. Meanwhile, her family's attempts at reconciliation became increasingly desperate. They began with fake apologies and manipulation, progressed to bribes and bargaining, and eventually escalated to threats and ultimatums. Clara ignored them all with the serene confidence of someone who had finally found her true worth. The transformation was remarkable. Clara, who had spent 28 years begging for scraps of affection from people who saw her as a servant, now found herself surrounded by people who celebrated her success and supported her dreams. The contrast was so stark it would have been funny if it hadn't been so painful to remember how long she had accepted less than she deserved. 6 months after that disastrous weekend in Maui that changed everything, Alexander took Clara back to the same beach where they had shared their first kiss. As they walked along the water's edge at sunset, he stopped and turned to face her. Clara Bennett, he said, dropping to one knee in the sand. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You're brilliant, talented, strong, and beautiful inside and out. You've taught me what real love looks like, and I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else. Will you marry me? The ring he produced was spectacular, but Clara barely noticed it through her tears of joy. This was the moment every fairy tale promised, but it felt earned rather than lucky. She had fought for her self-worth, stood up to bullies, and chosen to value herself properly. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reward for having the courage to demand better. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. The engagement announcement made headlines in business and social publications. Clara Bennett, successful event planner, was marrying Alexander Rains, billionaire entrepreneur. The photos were beautiful, the details were glamorous, and the world took notice of Cinderella's spectacular happy ending. Clara's family, of course, had opinions about the engagement. They called with congratulations that sounded more like demands for access to her new status. They wanted to meet Alexander, wanted invitations to exclusive events, wanted to bask in the reflected glory of Clara's success. Clara listened to their transparent attempts at reconciliation with detached amusement. Now that she was engaged to a billionaire, suddenly they valued her presence. Now that she had achieved spectacular success, suddenly they wanted to celebrate her achievements. Now that she was headline news, suddenly they were proud to call her family. But Clara had learned the difference between love and opportunism. Real love had supported her when she had nothing but potential. Real love had celebrated her success without trying to take credit. Real love had encouraged her to demand better treatment instead of accepting abuse. The wedding planning process was a revelation in how differently the world treated Clara now. Every vendor wanted to work with her. Every venue begged for her business. Every service provider treated her with the respect and deference she had always deserved but rarely received. The contrast with Megan's disastrous wedding was impossible to ignore. Where Megan's event had been cobbled together at the last minute in a community center with pizza and grocery store flowers, Clara's wedding was being planned as the social event of the season. The guest list included celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. The venue was Alexander's estate in Napa Valley, transformed into a garden paradise. The catering was handled by Thomas Chin himself. The flowers were flown in from around the world. Every detail was perfect, every vendor was honored to participate, and every element showcased Clara's expertise and Alexander's devotion. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of love, success, and the power of knowing your worth. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks before the wedding, when Clara's mother called with a request that perfectly encapsulated the family's blindness to their own behavior. "Clara, darling," Patricia said in her most manipulative voice, "I was hoping you might consider hiring Megan to help with your wedding planning. She's been having such a hard time since her own wedding, and I thought this might be a nice way to include her in your special day." The audacity was breathtaking. After uninviting Clara from the wedding she had planned for free, after months of emotional abuse and manipulation, after treating her like a disposable servant, they wanted Clara to hire Megan as her wedding planner. "Mom," Clara said calmly, "I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about our relationship." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean that my wedding is not an opportunity for family reconciliation or charity employment. My wedding is a celebration of my marriage to Alexander, planned by professionals who respect my vision and value my business. Megan has no place in that process." "But she's your sister, Clara. Surely you can find some way to include her." "She had the chance to be included in my life, Mom. She chose to throw it away for seating chart space at her own wedding. That was her decision, and these are the consequences. You can't punish her forever for one mistake." There it was again, one mistake. Even now, even facing the complete destruction of their relationship with Clara, they couldn't acknowledge the pattern of abuse and exploitation that had defined their family dynamic for decades. "I'm not punishing anyone," Clara said. "I'm simply choosing to surround myself with people who love and support me. That's a basic life skill I should have learned years ago. But what will people think if your own sister isn't involved in your wedding?" And there was the real concern. Not Clara's happiness, not family healing, not genuine remorse for their behavior. They were worried about appearances, about what people would think when they noticed the family's absence from Clara's celebration. "People will think what they want to think," Clara replied. "But anyone who matters will understand that I chose to include people who actually care about my happiness rather than people who see my success as an opportunity to exploit." The conversation ended with Patricia's typical guilt manipulation and threats, all of which bounced off Clara harmlessly. She had developed an immunity to their emotional terrorism, and it felt like a superpower. The wedding itself was everything Clara had dreamed of and more. Alexander's estate was transformed into a fairy tale setting with thousands of white roses, crystal chandeliers hanging from century-old oak trees, and a reception that would be talked about for years. Clara wore a custom Vera Wang gown that made her feel like a queen, and Alexander looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. But the most beautiful part of the day wasn't the perfect flowers or the exquisite food or the stunning venue. It was the look on Alexander's face when he saw Clara walking down the aisle. It was the tears in his eyes as they exchanged vows. It was the pride and joy radiating from every person in attendance as they watched two people who genuinely loved and respected each other promise to build a life together. The guest list was a who's who of business, entertainment, and society, but Clara had also included the people who had supported her journey from invisible sister to successful entrepreneur to billionaire's bride. Her assistant from the early days of her business was there. Sarah Chun, the lawyer who had validated Clara's decision to stand up for herself, was there. Thomas Chun was there, having become a genuine friend through his connection to Alexander. Notably absent were Clara's parents, Megan, and the extended family who had spent months trying to manipulate their way back into Clara's good graces. Their absence was discussed in whispers among the guests, but Clara felt only peace about their exclusion. She had learned that family wasn't about blood relation. It was about love, support, and mutual respect. The ceremony itself was perfect. Alexander's vows brought tears to every eye in attendance as he promised to love, support, and cherish Clara for the rest of their lives. Clara's vows were equally moving as she thanked Alexander for showing her what real love looked like and promised to be his partner in every adventure life brought them. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by 300 people but felt intimate and private. Clara had never been happier in her entire life. The reception that followed was legendary. Alexander had hired a full orchestra for dancing under the stars. The food was a culinary masterpiece that had guests requesting Thomas Chen's contact information. The champagne flowed freely, and the celebration continued well into the night. But for Clara, the most satisfying moment came when she checked her phone during a quiet moment and saw the flood of messages from her estranged family. They had clearly seen the wedding coverage in the social media posts and news reports, and their responses ranged from fury to desperate pleading to transparent attempts at manipulation. Meghan's message was particularly telling. I saw your wedding pictures online. You look beautiful, and everything looks perfect. I can't believe you didn't invite your own family. David's parents are asking questions, and I'm humiliated. How could you do this to me? Even now, even watching Clara's fairy tale wedding from the outside, Meghan managed to make it about her own embarrassment and inconvenience. The complete lack of self-awareness was stunning but no longer surprising. Clara deleted the messages without responding and returned to her reception, where her new husband was waiting with champagne and a smile that made her heart skip. This was her life now, surrounded by people who celebrated her success, supported her dreams, and loved her unconditionally. The honeymoon in Italy was pure magic. Alexander had rented a villa in Tuscany that overlooked rolling hills covered in vineyards. They spent 2 weeks exploring ancient cities, dining at world-class restaurants, and simply enjoying each other's company without the pressures of work or outside expectations. It was during their honeymoon that Clara received a call from a journalist writing an article about women entrepreneurs who had overcome family dysfunction to achieve success. The reporter wanted to interview Clara about her journey from invisible sister to billionaire's wife. I'm not interested in discussing my family situation, Clara told the reporter. But I'd be happy to talk about building a successful business and finding the courage to value yourself properly. The article that resulted was a masterpiece of inspiration. It focused on Clara's professional achievements, her innovative approach to event planning, and her philosophy about demanding respect in business relationships. The family drama was mentioned only briefly as an example of how personal relationships can sometimes undermine professional success. The article was picked up by major business publications and led to speaking opportunities at entrepreneurship conferences. Clara found herself becoming a role model for women who were learning to set boundaries and demand better treatment from family and colleagues. But perhaps the most rewarding outcome was the messages Clara received from women who recognized their own stories in her journey. They wrote about family members who took their achievements for granted, romantic partners who diminished their success, and professional relationships where they accepted less than they deserved. Clara began responding to these messages, offering encouragement and practical advice about setting boundaries and recognizing your own worth. She realized that her painful experience with her family had given her a platform to help other women escape similar situations. A year after the wedding, Clara and Alexander were featured on the cover of Forbes as a power couple who were changing the landscape of business and philanthropy. The article detailed their individual achievements and their collaborative efforts to support women entrepreneurs through mentorship and investment. The success was intoxicating, but what Clara treasured most was the genuine partnership she had built with Alexander. He never tried to overshadow her achievements or take credit for her success. Instead, he amplified her voice, opened doors for her business, and celebrated every milestone with enthusiasm. Their marriage was everything Clara had dreamed of but never dared to expect. They traveled the world together, built businesses together, and supported each other's dreams with unwavering dedication. Alexander encouraged Clara to take risks, pursue opportunities, and never settle for less than she deserved. 2 years after their wedding, Clara opened a second office in New York and was planning events for clients around the world. Her company had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 15 specialists who handled everything from intimate gatherings to corporate conferences for Fortune 500 companies. The financial success was gratifying, but Clara's true satisfaction came from the respect she commanded in her industry. Vendors competed for her business. Clients sought her expertise. Competitors studied her methods. She had become exactly what she had always had the potential to be: a leader, an innovator, and a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, her family's attempts at reconciliation had evolved from desperate pleading to bitter resentment. They had apparently convinced themselves that Clara's success was undeserved, that Alexander had only married her for her business connections, and that their estrangement was somehow Clara's loss rather than their own. The delusion was so complete that Clara almost felt sorry for them. They were missing out on knowing the woman she had become, the success she had achieved, and the happiness she had found. But their loss was a choice they had made through their own behavior, and Clara felt no obligation to rescue them from the consequences of their actions. The third anniversary of Meghan's disastrous wedding approached with little fanfare from Clara's perspective. She was too busy planning a charity gala for Alexander's foundation and preparing for the launch of her new book about entrepreneurship and self-worth to pay attention to the calendar. But apparently her family was very aware of the anniversary, because Patricia called with yet another attempt at emotional manipulation. "Clara, it's been 3 years," her mother said without preamble. "Don't you think it's time to forgive and forget? Life is short, and family is all we really have in the end." "Actually, Mom, what we really have in the end is the relationships we've nurtured with love and respect," Clara replied calmly. "I have those relationships. They just don't happen to be with you. But we're your family. We raised you. We love you. You raised me to serve your needs without question. That's not love. That's exploitation. And I've learned the difference." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but Clara's position was unshakable. She had built a beautiful life surrounded by people who valued her properly. She had no interest in returning to relationships that diminished her worth or made her question her value. After ending the call, Clara looked around her beautiful office overlooking Central Park, thought about her loving husband waiting at home, considered the exciting projects on her desk, and felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. She had started as the invisible sister who begged for scraps of affection from people who saw her as a convenient source of labor. She had endured years of emotional manipulation, professional exploitation, and personal dismissal. She had been uninvited from a wedding she had planned with her own money and effort. But that cruelty had also been her liberation. It had forced her to recognize her worth, demand better treatment, and choose relationships that elevated rather than diminished her. It had led her to Alexander, to success, to happiness, and to a life beyond her wildest dreams. The girl who had once desperately hoped her family would value her contribution to a wedding was now a woman who commanded respect in boardrooms around the world. The sister who had been dismissed via text message was now married to one of the most influential men in the country. The daughter who had been told not to make things difficult was now making headlines for her achievements. And the best part was that none of it was revenge. Clara hadn't set out to show her family what they had lost or to make them regret their treatment of her. She had simply chosen to value herself properly and build a life that reflected that value. The spectacular success that followed was just the natural result of recognizing her worth and refusing to accept less. As Clara prepared to leave the office and return to her loving husband, her beautiful home, and her extraordinary life, she reflected on the lesson that had changed everything. You teach people how to treat you by what you accept. For 28 years, Clara had accepted crumbs and called it love. The moment she started demanding better treatment, the universe responded by giving her everything she had ever dreamed of and more. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Dinner reservation at 8. Can't wait to hear about your day and celebrate your success. I love you, Mrs. Raines." Clara smiled as she gathered her things and headed home to the man who had shown her what real love looked like. She had gone from being the sister with no place at the wedding to being the woman with everything she had ever wanted. And if that wasn't the perfect revenge, Clara didn't know what was. But honestly, she was too happy to call it revenge anymore. She preferred to think of it as justice. Sometimes the universe has a way of making things right, rewarding those who have the courage to demand better and punishing those who take good people for granted. Clara Bennett Rains had learned her worth, and the world had responded accordingly. And she lived happily, valuably, and respectfully ever after. So grab your popcorn and hold on to your hearts, because this story proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living so well that the people who dismissed you can only watch from the sidelines as you soar beyond their wildest imagination. And if this story of courage, self-worth, and spectacular triumph touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Because every invisible sister deserves to know that her worth isn't determined by other people's blindness. It's determined by her own courage to demand better,